turns to Jesse and goes, what the heck? And it's a paraphrase. And and then Jesse's like, okay, there's one more that his own father didn't even think of him. So David comes in, and God's like, yeah, he's the guy. And he names one reason and one reason alone. He says, I want David because David's a man after my own heart. And I realized that if you want to catch all virtue, that is the one. Because if you follow God's heart, the closer you get to him, by diffusion, you'll glean those characteristics. And from there, you'll find yourself inheriting every sort of wisdom, every good deed, every act of courage you'll find within that pursuit. And I thought, man, that from that sort of divine perspective, I can see some direction in my life. So that was my prayer. And I realized that it had taken hold a little while later. I was like driving through town. I saw the houses and like the people they represented. And I thought, wow, that's really something. And it like really moved me in the moment, which was uncommon for me. I'm not the most stoic guy in the world, but to see all the houses and like, man, these people matter. And in that moment, they mattered to me an awful lot because they mattered to God. And that was indicative of the subtle but significant change that was happening in me. And because of that, I jumped into politics, and I did it with both feet. But I want to point you guys to something again, because early 2012, I make that subtle but significant seed of character that I sowed in my life, which led to me volunteering, which led to the next job. And I think without that passion, I would not have been able to do a good job on that job, which led me to this. And without the passion, again, I wouldn't have been able to have it be as effective as it has been, because it was supposed to be like a 4-month deal where I talked to a few groups in Wisconsin, but I managed to stick with it all the way through school. So those little seeds of character that you sow earlier in your life pay magnificent dividends later on. I've been fantastically blessed by this job. I've seen a great part of the nation because of it. So little things you do now are just huge. So it's never too early to start sowing seeds of character, because it pays enormous dividends later on in your life, especially you young people. Whoa, we've got an update for me, but we're not going to do it about now. So that's just real quick how I got into politics. But real quick on talking to elected officials, there's 3 ways you can do it, right? In person is the most effective, because once again, they're people too. And then if you write a letter or email, just make sure it's well written. And then you can call their office. If you get a local level official, you might very well get a hold of them. But if you call your U.S. Senator, you're not going to really get a hold of them. But if you get 1,000 people calling staffers saying, hey, I really care about this, the senator will take notice. And then be prepared. You don't have to know about absolutely everything, but you care about one issue, talk about that one issue. And just be nice. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I do. Just a while ago, I was talking to the father of an elected official in Oklahoma. And he had homeschooled her, but she was shocked to find out that one of the most hated and feared days on the Capitol calendar was homeschool day. Why? Because while the students were in the rotunda looking at the artwork, the parents were going on up, hassling the staffers, trying to get a hold of the legislative officials, and doing it in a very unwinsome way and just being very, very pushy. And as a result, they lost all influence with their state legislature and were disliked as a people group by their legislature, which is a remarkably dangerous place to be. So eventually they had to reach out to the homeschool community and say, hey guys, knock it off. And they had a lot of turnover there, and they've managed to pass a lot of very sympathetic laws to homeschoolers since then, but they had to change their approach. So that's important. And like I said before, the most effective communicators never attack the people they're trying to convince. And a nation is much, much more than its policies. If you could take a nation and grind it into facts and statistics and probabilities, you could take it all, put it through a computer, and it'll end up being the best nation in the world. But of course you can't do that, because the best politicians are not mathematicians. There's something beyond that. There's some other struggle that's going on here. So there was a Scottish politician of the 1800s, and he said this, which is remarkably astute, and I think applies certainly to our time, as well as his, and probably all time periods. He said, let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws. Let me write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes its laws. What's he saying here? Well, he's not saying just music. What he's saying, let me control what people think about, what they love, what they hate, what they put into music. Let me control their culture, because music is indicative of the culture. And then I will have controlled everything. But if you don't have that sort of underlying control of a government, of a nation, you're just going to lose the nation. Because what happens when everyone doesn't like a law? Well, they'll just repeal the law or else ignore it. We've got a law in Wisconsin that says it's illegal to serve apple pie without cheese. A really weird law of the dairy lobby of the early 1900s, I'm sure. And I've never once heard of it having been observed. It probably was somewhere along the line. And it's not that apples and cheese don't go together magnificently. You guys from out of Wisconsin might not realize that, but it's true. And anyways, we ignore it because it's a weird law. In the same way, if there's, I'm sure you got weird laws here too, but you have to have some sort of population that agrees with these laws and follows these laws, because otherwise it's all for naught. John Adams said this: "It is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand." And he also said this: "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, or gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." So there are really 5 levels of government. I told you the incomplete story at the beginning. We've got the federal, state, and local levels of government, and there's 2 more: the family and the individual. And without this individual form of self-government, a nation cannot stand. There has to be some undergirding morality to any sort of nation that binds it together. You have to have some sort of moral and cultural fiber. Otherwise, a nation cannot stand, right? And then Franklin said this: "Men will ultimately be governed by God or by tyrants, even if that tyrant is yourself. The truest form of freedom comes with understanding and applying God's laws to your life. Because a life spent avoiding God's truths will end up finding yourself way more shackled than one going towards his truths." But this whole idea I'm getting at is that there's a cultural battle going on. I talked about it before, that you take politics, conservative versus liberal, shove it in the corner of Christian versus secular. And the culture of a nation is far more valuable than its politics, and unless we're changing hearts and minds, any political victory will be short-lived and meaningless. And the real world has become incredibly hostile to Christian values. Now I say real world and put it in quotes, and by that I mean the world outside of maybe the house you grew up in. You know, out of high school, I spent just 1 semester at UW-Sheboygan, Living University of Wisconsin School. And I was there, and I had English 102, and in English 102 I learned from my professor that there's no such thing as truth or morality, they're totally human constructs. She harped on that one a lot. She also told the class that that the Bible is totally useless as even a literary reference, that it is riddled with errors and is therefore useless to be used. And then she also told me in particular that I knew absolutely nothing about the Constitution or the Supreme Court. Gave me a C on that paper, not because it was poorly written, but because I was wrong. In English class, now those of you who know something about English majors probably think, yeah, that's probably the most likely class to get that message. But that was very quickly I learned, and I half expected it, and I half relished the opportunity. I probably would have been a little disappointed if I didn't encounter some liberalism in my short stint there. But I got this from her, and since then I've immortalized her by using her as an example of how easy it is to step outside your door and find a pushback to your Christian culture. In fact, you really just have to flip on the TV and you'll find it screaming at you. And there's this terrible statistic, and it blows my mind. At first I disbelieved it, but 70% of young Christians who go off to a secular university lose their faith by the end of the first year. 70%. They'll go in saying, yes, I'm a Christian. They'll come out after 1 year saying, I'm not a Christian anymore. 70%. Even more revealing is 50% of young Christians who go off to a so-called Christian university lose their faith by the end of their very first year. So, that's a lot like, then we decry the evil school system for taking our young people from us, and it's true they deserve some blame. But it's a lot like having a gladiator. He needs to fight a lion. And you send him out there without a sword or a shield or lion fighting lessons, and you'll find that this guy is eaten by the lion. We get mad at the lion when the lion eats the guy, right? But we shouldn't be surprised about the nature of lions, and I think we're done being surprised about the nature of academia and secular culture. I think we fully understand the lions of culture by now. And the solution to both problems is the same. And if you want your gladiator to win, you give him a sword and shield or whatever the best weapons for fighting lions are, and you give him lion fighting lessons so he understands the beast, and then you give him a few solid buddies to stand next to. And he should win every single time. Because truth, well defended, reigns victorious, or at least holds its ground. We should not have a net loss of believers when we send our young people into the field. We should have a net gain. Because that truth, well defended, should be to influence in other people's lives, but instead we find our young people unable to make that sort of defense of what they believe. And then while you're engaging the real world, I want you guys to understand your values so they become deep-rooted convictions. There's things you know that you believe, but then there are things you know why you believe. And so many times we have Christians that are told what to believe, but they're not told why to believe it. Why is it valid? Why is it philosophically valid? Why is it historically valid, right? And then hold on to your standard. Is there a standard that you hold the world to? Now, invariably there is, but not everyone has one that's so rock solid and immovable as such that maybe Wilberforce had. And then never apologize for your values. So often Christians are, almost apologetically Christian. I don't mean apologetics as in, the act of defending your faith. I mean, like, they're almost sorry that they're Christians. That they feel bad because they have to take a stand that might hurt someone else's feelings. And, sometimes it's okay. It's really okay to take a stand, even if someone else doesn't like it. Maybe then it's even more important to take that stand. But then are you too young to make a difference? And absolutely not, but the bar has been set far, far, far too low for young people. And we find that our young people are now stooping to reach it. And your influence as a young person is a lot greater now than it will be even in just a few years. When I was going door to door for American Majority Action, which is like a sister organization to American Majority, I was 18 and I had a buddy with me who was 15. And we were knocking doors. And one lady, we talked with her for a little while, and she said, "How old are you guys?" And I said, "Well, I'm 18. And my buddy said, "Well, I'm 15. And she sat down, I handed her a piece of paper, and she sat there with her mouth open looking at it. And she's probably still there today because she was so shocked that someone our age could come and have a conversation with her that we thought was pretty unremarkable. We probably had it several times already that day. But our influence was greater because we were younger than we were expected to make a difference. And I feel it in this position. When I first started this job, I was 19, and there was a little bit of a shock factor when I was, at the end I'd say, by the way, I'm 19. I'm 23 now, so the shock factor is gone. But, and I tried not to do it out of a, self-serving, like, look at me, the great 19-year-old type way. I was really trying to check any pride on that. But I saved that because, a lot of the people were your age. Most of you guys are not quite 19. And I was just infatuated with the idea that young people can do things that other people do not expect of them. So when my boss handed me this idea, he basically said, "Fill 2.5 hours, I have no source material for you." And I rose to the occasion. Little 19-year-old Micah, not little, I was the same size. So 19-year-old Micah set out, and there was a lot of prayer that went into that too, but I can only thank God for what it was able to become. But, so yeah, you can do things that other people don't expect of you, but the greatest thing is that you have to be able to expect it of yourself. And then school is not a cocoon. We have this idea that when you move from middle school to high school, suddenly you're a high schooler. You're going to be way bigger and you're going to shave and everything. But but you get there and you find out you're a middle schooler just 1 year older. And that's why freshmen are so funny. And the even funnier transition is when high schoolers go to college and they find out that they're high school students 1 year earlier. And that's why you can tell who the freshmen are every year in school. And it's a lot of fun. And the more dangerous cocoon is this, though. People think they're going to graduate college or high school if they don't plan to go to college, and then they're going to be magically prepared as they walk across the stage, and they're going to become, a big, strong adult now, and they're going to be ready for the world. But they realize as they walk across the stage, they were the same person on both ends of that platform. And there's a few different things that happen. A lot of times, I've seen this with my friends who've graduated. Some, they graduate with no real passion outside of their own leisure because there's nothing else that got a hold of them and shook them and said, "Hey, God's got a plan for your life, and there's some important things for you to do here on earth." And what they end up doing is one, they'll just flounder for a little while, thinking, well, you know what? And even if they find a job, they have no real direction to their lives. And the other one is this. They find, they get to the end of their college, you're like, man, I just am not ready. So they go ahead and they spend more time at school, maybe get a master's degree or something because they're trying to extend the cocoon. And I've seen both. And that's not to say that master's degrees and even further education than that is inherently bad, because it's not. There's definitely a place for it. It exists for a reason. But there's also a place for understanding when is the time to make that leap and being prepared for it. There's an old adage that goes, the best time to start something is 6 months ago. And that just to say that if you started something 6 months ago, you'd already be reaping the benefits of it. So if you're sowing things like character and work ethic and understanding your values and your worldview now, it pays dividends in a lot of cases. It pays dividends almost immediately. And then finally, I guess start right now. That there's, like I said, the best time to start is like 6 months ago. And it's never too early, and it's never really too late to start standing up and understanding and defending your values, because it's a pretty broken world that needs an awful lot of mending. And I've got 2 closing thoughts. I used to just have one, but now I have 2. You know, the first one is funny, so please laugh at me when I get to the punchline. But it's this: that during 2012, I was going door to door for American Majority Action. That was also my one semester at UW-Sheboygan. So I was going to school full time, and I was working another 35 hours a week, just knocking doors. Every day when I got done with school, I literally turned a corner and ran outside the building, because no one could see me past that corner. And then I would work from end of class till dark every single day. And then Saturdays was 10 a.m. till dark. And that was my schedule for a few months, and they paid me pretty well. I was happy to do it. But more than that, I was really, really passionate, because I would leave the house in the morning and say, "Mom, Dad, saving the world today." And I meant it as a joke, but I also meant it pretty seriously. But election day rolls around. I had some sparkling grape juice I had to share